Just curious. What device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
I still remember the exact moment when the world I had so carefully pieced together over 2 decades of marriage and motherhood came crashing down around me in a whirlwind of betrayal and legal paperwork that left me reeling from the sheer audacity of how quickly everything could be stripped away, starting with that ordinary Tuesday morning in our suburban home just outside Columbus, where the sun filtered through the kitchen blinds onto the granite counters I had chosen during one of our rare splurges after Tom landed a big commission selling those overpriced SUVs to families who dreamed of weekend adventures, but mostly just commuted to dead-end jobs. And there I was flipping pancakes with butter sizzling in the pan while Emily chattered about her school project on American history and Jack begged for extra syrup. The kind of domestic rhythm that made me believe we had achieved the stability my own childhood in rural Ohio had lacked after Dad's mill job vanished in the Rust Belt downturns of the 80s, but then Tom walked in from the garage with his face set in that determined jawline he got from years of negotiating deals that always seemed to favor him just a little too much. And without preamble, he announced that he was leaving because our life together had become a cage stifling his ambitions. His voice steady as he outlined how his attorney had already filed the papers citing irreconcilable differences amplified by my supposed emotional volatility from the stress of raising 2 kids on top of my part-time gig shelving books at the public library where I escaped into stories of women who triumphed over adversity in ways that felt increasingly distant from my own reality. And before I could even process the words, he was ushering Emily and Jack out the door with overnight bags slung over their shoulders. Their confused glances back at me as if I were the one disrupting the family portrait we had posed for every Christmas card since they were toddlers. Leaving me standing there in my faded robe with a spatula dangling from my hand and a plate of cooling pancakes mocking the routine we had built brick by brick through PTA meetings, soccer practices, and late-night talks about saving for college funds that Tom now claimed were his alone to manage after the judge, swayed by his polished lawyer's narrative of me as the nagging wife who couldn't keep up with his rising star in the cutthroat world of car salesmanship, awarded him primary custody, along with the house that held echoes of birthday parties and holiday gatherings. The savings account he had quietly drained through investments in dubious real estate ventures that promised quick flips, but delivered only red ink hidden behind his charismatic smiles at neighborhood barbecues. And even Buster, the golden retriever who had been my faithful companion during Tom's increasingly frequent business trips that reeked of cheap perfume and excuses, all of it vanishing in a court ruling. That felt like a bad dream from one of those Lifetime movies about scorned women fighting back against the system stacked against them. But this was my life unraveling in real time with no commercial breaks or heroic resolutions, forcing me to pack a single duffel bag with essentials like my mother's old pearl necklace and a few photos of the kids from happier days while the locks on the doors were changed by a locksmith Tom hired on the spot, and dignity, oh, that elusive quality I had clung to through years of overlooking his flirtations at company picnics and the way his eyes lingered on younger women at the grocery store. That too eroded as I drove away in my 10-year-old Honda Civic with its rattling muffler and a gas tank barely half full, the tears blurring the taillights of the life I left behind on that tree-lined street where neighbors who once waved now whispered about the divorce that confirmed every stereotype of midlife marital collapse in the heartland. With no family nearby after Mom's passing from that sudden heart attack 2 years earlier and my sister buried in her own chaos of 3 kids and a husband who traveled for work, the only sanctuary that flickered in my mind amid the panic was her old country house tucked away on a forgotten lane outside Mansfield. That weathered Victorian with its peeling white paint and sprawling porch where I had spent childhood summers catching lightning bugs in jars and listening to her stories about resilience forged in the Great Depression, tales passed down from her own parents who had homesteaded the land before factories lured them to the cities. A place I had vowed never to return to because it symbolized the stagnation I escaped when I married Tom and moved to the suburbs chasing the American dream of upward mobility that now mocked me with its fragility. Yet desperation overrides pride every time. So I pointed the car northwest through sheets of relentless rain that hammered the windshield like Accusations. The wipers slapping rhythmically as miles of interstate blurred into memories of family road trips where Tom drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gesturing grandly about his plans to expand the dealership into a chain that would make us set for life. Plans that evidently included siphoning funds to support his affair with Lisa, that ambitious 28-year-old receptionist who had climbed the ranks at his office by batting eyelashes and filing nails between calls, her social media posts already flaunting vacations to Florida beaches that should have come from our joint account, and after 300 grueling miles that stretched my bladder and my resolve, I arrived at the house as twilight deepened the shadows around the overgrown lilac bushes and the gravel driveway crunching under tires that needed replacing more than I needed this regression. The front door yielding to the key still hidden under the flower pot, as if Mom had anticipated my eventual defeat. And inside the air hung heavy with dust, and the faint mustiness of disuse mingled with traces of her lavender soap that clung to the curtains like a ghost's perfume. So I flicked on the hall light that buzzed faintly and began the grim task of reclaiming the space by hauling boxes from the foyer to the attic stairs and wiping down surfaces coated in a decade's worth of neglect since her health declined, and I prioritized my nuclear family over this relic of her solitary years after Dad's early passing from lung issues tied to his factory shifts, and it was during this frantic cleaning in the study, a room lined with bookshelves groaning under volumes of Harlequin romances and gardening manuals that she devoured in her widowhood, that my elbow caught the edge of the largest shelf while maneuvering it to clear space for a makeshift bed, causing the whole thing to shift with a scrape that revealed a narrow gap in the wallpaper behind it, and curiosity piqued despite the exhaustion weighing my limbs like lead. I wedged my fingers into the seam and pulled away a panel to expose a small metal safe embedded in the wall, its combination dial tarnished but intact, evoking images from those noir films Tom and I used to watch on date nights where hidden compartments held fortunes or scandals that appended lives, and without much thought beyond the thrill of discovery, I twisted the numbers to my birthday. April 15, 1979, the tumblers aligning with a series of soft clicks that seemed to echo through the empty house like a long-held breath released. The door popping open to disclose not stacks of cash or jewelry, but a solitary envelope sealed with age tape and bearing my name in Mom's familiar cursive that slanted slightly to the right from her years of letter writing to distant cousins. And as I tore it open under the desk lamp's warm glow, the opening lines leaped out to seize my breath. Dearest Sarah, if this finds you in the depths you've hinted at in our last talks, know that life's cruelties often circle back to test our mettle, and this secret has always been my trump card, guarded even from your father, because its revelation could shatter the fragile peace we nurtured here amid the fields and quiet nights. But now it passes to you as armor against those who would leave you broken, beginning with the shadows cast by Tom's ambitions that I saw gathering long before you did, tied to truths from summers past that bind us all in unexpected ways. The words trailed off onto a second page folded inside, but the impact hit like a freight train barreling through the night, implying layers of knowledge about my ex that predated our vows and perhaps even my own origins in this very house. And as rain pattered against the window panes like impatient fingers, I slumped into the armchair that still bore the indentation from Mom's reading sessions, the letter trembling in my grasp while questions swirled about what other revelations lurked in its folds, especially when a single name surfaced in the margins: Elias Grant, the enigmatic neighbor from my girlhood who vanished after a family dispute, suggesting the trump card might unlock not just vengeance, but a reconfiguration of my entire identity that could either empower or devastate in ways I wasn't prepared to face alone in the encroaching darkness. Clutching that partially read letter as if it were the last thread connecting me to some semblance of control in a life that had spiraled into chaos faster than a Midwest tornado ripping through a trailer park, I forced myself to stand on legs that felt like overcooked noodles after the emotional whiplash of the discovery. The safe's door hanging open like an invitation to dive deeper into Mom's hidden world that she had so meticulously concealed behind the facade of a devoted mother and widow. who baked pies for church socials and tended her victory garden with the precision of someone who had weathered economic depressions and personal heartaches without ever letting the cracks show. And as the storm outside subsided into a steady drizzle that tapped against the roof like Morse code messages from the past, I unfolded the second page under the desk lamp's unsteady light, my eyes scanning the looping script that revealed how she had begun collecting evidence on Tom almost from the moment he entered our lives with his flashy convertible and promises of a future brighter than the neon signs at the local drive-in where we had our first real date amid popcorn fights and stolen kisses that masked his underlying opportunism, detailing specific instances like the time he persuaded her to co-sign a loan for his initial dealership expansion under the guise of family investment only to divert funds towards speculative stock tips from brokers who turned out to be as reliable as a screen door on a submarine, and she described confronting him subtly during one of our holiday gatherings when I was pregnant with Jack, noticing how his eyes darted away when she mentioned irregularities in the bank statements she had glimpsed while helping with our taxes. His response a charming deflection laced with that boyish grin he used to disarm everyone from skeptical customers to me during our arguments over household budgets that always ended with me conceding because I wanted to believe in the man who brought home stuffed animals from county fairs and coached Little League with an enthusiasm that briefly overshadowed the late nights and unexplained bonuses. But Mom's vigilance had extended to photocopying documents she obtained through her connections at the county clerk's office, where she volunteered after Dad's death, amassing a dossier that painted Tom not as the hard-working provider I idolized, but as a serial corner cutter who juggled debts like a circus act on the verge of collapse, and the humor in her words struck me even then as I read her wry aside about how his silver tongue might one day tie him in knots tighter than the ones he wove around our family finances. A light jab that brought a reluctant chuckle from my lips, because it reminded me of the times I had teased him about his sales patter sounding like a used car lot infomercial, oblivious to the deeper deceptions simmering beneath the surface like a pot left too long on the stove. Yet the letters revelations carried a weight that pressed on my chest, implying that she had held back out of love for me, choosing to whisper warnings during our phone calls about watching your nest egg closely rather than shattering the illusion outright. And emboldened by this inheritance of guarded truths, I delved back into the safe where a slim ledger caught my eye, its pages filled with notations in her neat hand tracking Tom's transactions from as far back as our honeymoon year when we splurged on a cabin in the Smoky Mountains funded by what he called a windfall commission that now appeared suspiciously routed through a shell account she had flagged. Each entry cross-referenced with dates of our major life milestones like Emily's birth and the down payment on our suburban home, making me realize how his ambitions had parasitically fed on the stability we built together while I focused on PDA bake sales and carpools that kept the kids' world intact, and the personal twist unfolded as I cross-checked the ledger against a small address book tucked beside it, finding entries for Elias Grant with circled phone numbers from the early 80s that aligned with summers when Mom sent me to stay with aunts in Cleveland. Her excuses about work always vague, but now reeking of a clandestine correspondence that hinted at more than neighborly chats over shared fences, stirring an unease in my gut because if the trump card encompassed not just Tom's frailties, but fractures in our own family lore, it could redefine the very foundation of who I thought I was beyond the betrayed wife and displaced mother. So with the weight of these discoveries settling like damp fog after the rain, I decided solitude wouldn't suffice for unraveling the full scope and reached for my phone to call Marlene Kowalski, my old high school confidant who had traded cheerleading pom-poms for a desk at the county recorder's office, where she sifted through deeds and liens with the tenacity of a detective in one of those gritty cop shows we binged during sleepovers, her voice crackling over the line with surprise at hearing from me after months of radio silence broken only by a sympathy card post-divorce. And after catching her up on the bare bones of my relocation without spilling the safe secrets just yet, I suggested meeting at our old haunt, the Silver Spoon Diner on the edge of Mansfield with its 4 mica counters scarred from decades of pie slices and coffee refills that fueled small-town gossip. Mills, arriving there the next morning as the scent of frying bacon mingled with the hum of locals debating football standings and gas prices that kept climbing like Tom's ego, and over plates of eggs over easy and toast that absorbed the bitterness of my situation. I slid the ledger across the table under the guise of needing advice on property records for Mom's house, watching Marlene's eyebrows arch as she flipped through the pages, her sharp intake of breath confirming suspicions when she recognized patterns matching recent fraud cases involving auto dealers who laundered money through vehicle flips. Her whispers about how Tom might have forged endorsements on titles during our marriage years, making my stomach churn with the realization that my signature on those joint documents had unwittingly enabled his schemes. And as we parted with her promise to pull discreet files without raising flags, a sly humor lightened the moment when she quipped that some men treated marriage like a lease they could trade in for a newer model, but the levity faded on my drive back as I pondered the implications of my own blindness. The evidence now suggesting that Mom's trump card implicated not only Tom's greed, but my inaction in questioning the cracks, a complicity born of love that now loomed as the next layer to confront. Especially when Marlene's final text buzzed in with a photo of a faded receipt from the ledger linking to an account in Elias's name, leaving me pulling over on the shoulder with hands gripping the wheel as the pieces hinted at a paternal secret that could either arm me against Tom or unravel the last threads of my self-assured identity in ways that promised more turmoil than triumph. That text from Marlene with the scanned receipt linking Tom's early schemes to an account under Elias Grant's name lingered in my mind like a half-remembered dream that twisted the knife of doubt deeper into the already raw wound of my appended life, prompting me to abandon the half-eaten sandwich on the kitchen counter amid the clutter of unearthed papers and head straight for the attic ladder that creaked under my weight as if protesting the intrusion into spaces long sealed against the passage of time and the burdens of unspoken histories. The air up there thick with the scent of aged wood and mothballs that evoked memories of holiday decorations hauled down each December under Mom's watchful eye while she hummed carols from her girlhood era to distract from the financial strains Dad's habits imposed on our modest existence. And as my flashlight beams swept across the jumbled trunks and cardboard boxes labeled in her precise handwriting with dates spanning from my birth year to just before her final illness, I pried open the one inscribed, "Personal Matters, Do Not Disturb," with a crowbar borrowed from the garage tools that gathered rust like forgotten regrets, revealing stacks of correspondence bundled with rubber bands that had dried and snapped at my touch. Each envelope postmarked from cities like Chicago and Pittsburgh, where Elias had built his real estate empire buying up distressed properties during the farm crises of the 80s that hit Ohio hard and left families like ours scraping by on welfare checks and odd jobs that barely covered the mortgage on this very house, and unfolding the top letter dated shortly after my conception. His words poured out in elegant script professing a love for Mom that had blossomed during stolen afternoons in the barn loft, while Dad toiled at the factory oblivious to the affair that promised escape from the drudgery, but ultimately dissolved under the weight of societal expectations and her sense of duty to the family she had already started. Details that painted her not as the saintly figure of my childhood who baked cookies for school fundraisers and volunteered at the senior center, but as a woman entangled in passions that led to ethical shortcuts like accepting hush money from Elias to cover Dad's gambling losses, which she reframed in her ledgers as legitimate loans to preserve the illusion of stability, and the trump card crystallized in my grasp as a notarized codicil to his will tucked among the love letters, outlining a trust fund established in my name with enough principal from his developments to reclaim the house, fund a custody battle, and expose Tom's fraud without relying on charity from pitying relatives. Yet this revelation carried the sting of blackmail potential because claiming it required proving my lineage through DNA samples Mom had secretly preserved in a vial labeled "for Sarah's sake," a move that could drag Elias's legitimate family into the scandal and ripple through Mansfield's tight-knit community where reputations crumbled faster than cornstalks in a hailstorm, forcing me to confront the dilemma of wielding this weapon against the man who had dismantled my world or burying it to honor the peace she had sacrificed so much to maintain. And as afternoon light slanted through the tiny attic window illuminating dust, motes dancing like elusive truths, I descended with the bundle under my arm and spread it across the dining table scarred from years of family. Meals where conversations skirted the edges of hardship with jokes about Dad's lucky streaks at the track that never quite panned out. Plotting my first act of revenge in the quiet hours that followed a sparse dinner of canned soup heated on the ancient stove whose pilot light flickered like my wavering resolve. Envisioning an anonymous package to the district attorney's office containing select ledger pages, and the flash drive's data formatted as a timeline of Tom's deceptions intertwined. With subtle nods to the trust that positioned me as the wronged heir rather than just the jilted ex, but infusing it with a witty edge by including a printed cartoon from an old newspaper clipping Mom had saved showing a fox in a suit raiding a henhouse captioned, "The Long Con," a jab that would land with ironic humor when he realized the source, chuckling to myself at the image of his smug expression cracking under the weight of exposure while his lawyer scrambled to spin it as marital spite, yet the moral quandary gnawed relentlessly because those same documents implicated Mom in unreported income that could taint her estate and, by extension, my claim. Risking audits that might uncover how she had once funneled Elias's funds to bail Tom out of an initial bad deal during our courtship when I had vouched for his character over her reservations whispered during a backyard chat amid the scent of fresh-mowed grass, making me an unwitting accomplice in the web of compromises that defined our lives and prompting a wave of self-recrimination for choices like overlooking his inconsistencies in favor of the comfort of routine family outings to Cedar Point where roller coasters mirrored the ups and downs I now rode alone. And in that tension between righteous indignation and the fear of collateral damage to innocents like Emily and Jack who might hear whispers at school about their grandmother's shadowy past, I sealed the envelope with tape that stuck unevenly like my fragmented plans. The growing conflict manifesting as a knot in my throat that no amount of pacing the creaky floorboards could loosen, especially when the phone trilled unexpectedly from its charger on the sideboard. The caller ID flashing Tom's name for the first time since the divorce hearing where he had avoided my gaze throughout the proceedings. His voice emerging smooth and solicitous over the line as he inquired about my well-being in that patronizing tone reserved for disgruntled customers he aimed to upsell, but laced with an undercurrent of probing curiosity when he casually mentioned hearing rumors of me rummaging through old family attics and suggested we meet to discuss a generous custody adjustment if I played my cards right. The implication hanging heavy that he had wind of my discoveries through some informant in Marlene's orbit or perhaps Lisa's network of salon gossips, leaving me gripping the receiver until my knuckles whitened as the call ended with his chuckle echoing like a warning shot across the bow, the uncertainty amplifying into a thunderous dread that whatever trump card I held, he might already be shuffling a counterdeck poised to fold my fragile hand before I could even ante up. Tom's probing call echoed in the empty rooms of the house like a predator's growl disguised as a friendly chat, fueling the fire of my resolve to strike first before he could weave his next web of half-truths and legal maneuvers that had already cost me so much in alimony scraps and visitation rights that felt more like supervised visits to a foreign country than time with my own children, so I spent the restless night mapping out the delivery of that anonymous package with a precision born of desperation and the kind of street-smart cunning I had picked up from years of navigating Tom's unpredictable moods during tax seasons when discrepancies in our returns always got smoothed over with his silver explanations, rising at dawn to finalize the contents under the kitchen's fluorescent hum that cast harsh shadows on the table strewn with printouts, and the cartoon clipping from Mom's scrapbook that depicted a scheming salesman with a fox's grin hoarding eggs while the hens clucked in protest, a perfect emblem for his career of over-promising on warranties and under-delivering on family obligations. And by mid-morning I had it all bundled in a plain brown envelope addressed to the district attorney's fraud division with no return label, but including a USB copy of the flash drive data timestamped to our marriage years. The ledger excerpts highlighting transfers that coincided with our family vacations to Disney where he posed for photos in Mickey ears while secretly funding his escapades, and tucked inside as the witty flourish a custom-printed card mimicking his dealership's logo, but altered to read Tom's Total Deals, where honesty comes to die. Complete with the cartoon for that ironic punch that would make any investigator chuckle before diving into the evidence. The humor in it all bubbling up as I imagined him opening a similar package at his office and seeing his caricature staring back, his face turning the color of overripe tomatoes during what should have been a routine sales meeting, and driving to the post office in Mansfield with the windows down to let the crisp fall air clear my head of doubts about whether this path skirted too close to harassment charges, or if a woman in my position deserved the catharsis of watching her betrayer squirm publicly. I dropped it in the outgoing slot with a sense of finality that propelled me back to the house where the safe waited like a Pandora's box half emptied, and as I rummaged for any overlooked items. To bolster future strikes, my fingers brushed a concealed compartment at the back, yielding a faded Polaroid snapshot from the early 90s showing a young Tom laughing with Mom and Elias at what looked like a company picnic by Lake Erie, their arms linked in a camaraderie that suggested more than casual acquaintance. But the real gut-wrench that twisted my insides came from the handwritten note on the reverse in Mom's hand questioning the timeline of Emily's conception against Tom's travel logs for a business conference that overlapped suspiciously with Elias's visits, planting seeds of doubt about paternity that extended beyond me to the children I had raised with bedtime stories and scraped knees. A revelation that hit with the force of a betrayal layered upon betrayal, because if my kids carried this hidden lineage, it could upend custody arguments in ways that favored Tom's narrative of a stable nuclear family over my fractured one. And the light vulgarity of the situation struck me as I paced the study, muttering to myself about how life had a way of kicking you square in the unmentionables just when you thought you'd dodged the worst. The dilemma forcing me to weigh the satisfaction of revenge against the risk of unraveling their sense of security in a world already rocked by divorce headlines in the local paper that speculated on my instability, based on anonymous sources likely fed by Lisa's circle. Yet the growing conflict only sharpened my appetite for the next move, disagreeing inwardly with my own choice to prioritize this vendetta over seeking a therapist's couch or rallying support from women's groups at the community center who might advocate for systemic change rather than personal payback. But the pull of impending justice proved too strong as reports trickled in via Marlene's midday text describing the buzz at the courthouse where Tom's name had surfaced in preliminary inquiries, her details painting a picture of him fielding calls from panicked partners in his fraud ring while projecting calm in a hastily called staff meeting that devolved into whispers about impending audits. And the witty fallout unfolded deliciously when a mutual acquaintance from our old neighborhood forwarded a screenshot of his dealership's Yelp page, suddenly flooded with one-star reviews alluding to foxes in the henhouse, without specifics. The anonymous posters clearly in the know and amplifying the sting with references to his long con that had the whole town chuckling over coffee at the diner about how the mighty salesman had finally met his match in Karma's clever script. Savoring that first taste of vindication as I brewed a pot of strong coffee to steady my nerves against the emotional high that bordered on recklessness. But the high crashed when evening shadows lengthened and I scrolled through Lisa's Instagram stories, showing her at a baby shower with Tom beaming beside her in a pose that screamed calculated domesticity, her captions gushing about new beginnings that mocked my losses and ignited a fresh wave of rage tempered by the Polaroid's implications. Deciding in that heated moment to confront her directly at the yoga studio she promoted relentlessly as her sanctuary for stressed souls, a irony not lost on me given how she had contributed to the stress that drove me from my home. So I printed a select page from the fraud files linking her family's auto parts supplier to Tom's schemes and slipped it into my purse. Alongside the photo, the uncertainty building as I rehearsed lines in the rearview mirror during the drive into town under a sky bruised with twilight clouds. Arriving just as her class ended with participants emerging in a glow of endorphins that contrasted sharply with my simmering turmoil, and spotting her in the lobby adjusting her mat with that effortless poise she wielded like a weapon. I approached with a forced smile, offering a compliment on her form before sliding the printout across the counter. Watching her eyes widen as she absorbed the dates and figures that tied her inheritance to his laundering, my voice low and laced with sarcasm about how downward-facing dog must be great for hiding from the IRS. But before she could summon a retort, her gaze fell on the Polaroid I placed next. The question about family ties hanging unspoken in the air as her expression shifted from defensiveness to a flicker of shared secrecy that suggested she knew fragments of the puzzle, perhaps from Tom's confessions during their pillow talks, and as she whispered that he had a counterplan brewing involving private investigators sniffing around Mom's estate for leverage. The cliffhanger settled over me like a chill wind as I left her standing there amid the scent of incense and betrayal, my mind racing toward the confrontation that could either seal my revenge or expose vulnerabilities I wasn't ready to defend. Lisa's whispered warning about Tom's counterplan slithered through my thoughts like smoke from a faulty chimney during the drive back to the country house under a canopy of stars that pierced the inky sky with indifferent brilliance, urging me to fortify my position by barricading the back door with the heavy oak sideboard that Mom had inherited from her own mother and double-checking the windows against any nocturnal intruders who might be dispatched by his network of shady contacts. From the auto world where deals often blurred into threats wrapped in handshakes. But the real fortification lay in the manila folder of trust documents and fraud timelines spread across the bed like a war map charting the battles of personal survival in a system that favored the slick over the steadfast. The vial of DNA sample glinting under the bedside lamp as a potential key to unlocking Elias's legacy that could either elevate me from destitute exile to empowered contender or drag me into a maelstrom of tabloid scrutiny about illegitimate heirs in a conservative community where such scandals simmered like unspoken family recipes passed down with cautionary tales. And as dawn broke with a chorus of roosters from neighboring farms echoing the urgency in my veins, I dressed in the simple blouse and jeans that echoed my pre-suburban self. The ones that spoke of resilience forged in Midwestern soil rather than the tailored outfits Tom had once bought to mold me into his idea of a trophy wife. Gathering the folder and a printed copy of the trust codicil notarized by a long-retired lawyer whose name Marlene had verified as legitimate, then setting out for his dealership on the outskirts of Mansfield where billboards touted Honest Tom's ride to reliability in letters that now seemed as hollow as his vows exchanged under an arch of wildflowers at our backyard wedding attended by kin who had since scattered like leaves in an autumn gale, arriving mid-morning when the lot buzzed with customers kicking tires and salespeople circling like vultures on commission highs, and marching past the showroom's gleam of chrome and leather with purpose that turned heads and silenced haggling conversations. I demanded an audience in his glass-walled office overlooking the inventory that represented the empire he had built on pilfered foundations, his initial surprise morphing into that calculated composure as he gestured to a chair opposite his desk cluttered with deal sheets and a family photo of Emily and Jack that twisted the knife of shared loss, but I remained standing to assert the ground I had lost in courtrooms and custody hearings, launching into the confrontation with a voice honed by months of solitary rehearsals amid the house's echoing silence, laying out the fraud evidence from Mom's ledger that traced his embezzlements back to our courtship days when he charmed her into investments that vanished into offshore accounts like mist over Lake Erie, interweaving it with the trust fund revelation that positioned me as Elias Grant's daughter and rightful beneficiary of assets sufficient to bury his schemes under waves of litigation funded by legitimate wealth rather than the desperation of a woman scraping by on library wages. And for the witty crescendo, I produced the altered dealership card from my pocket, sliding it across the blotter with a wry observation about how his long con had finally met a family heirloom that outfoxed the fox, watching his smirk falter as the implications sank in like rain into parched earth, his fingers drumming the desk in a rhythm that betrayed the panic bubbling beneath his salesman sheen while he countered with bluster about fabricated documents and my unstable state post-divorce that any judge would dismiss as vengeful fantasy. Yet the growing tension peaked when I unveiled the Polaroid and the DNA vial, questioning aloud if Emily's striking blue eyes and Jack's knack for numbers echoed Elias more than his genetic blueprint. A dilemma that forced him to confront not just financial ruin, but the specter of his children harboring secrets that could fracture their loyalty in ways his affair never intended. And in that charged silence broken only by the distant rev of a test drive engine, he sagged slightly and proposed a settlement out of court, offering full custody restoration and a lump sum from his personal holdings to avoid the scandal rippling through the community grapevine where reputations crumbled. Faster than the rusted relics in his back lot, the humor in his capitulation emerging as he quipped about preferring to keep the fox in the henhouse rather than let the hens run the farm. A light vulgarity underscoring the absurdity of our twisted tango that had me biting back a laugh amid the triumph that tasted bittersweet on my tongue. But the twist unfurled when he retrieved a file from his locked drawer and thrust forward a paternity report from a discreet lab dated years earlier, confirming Emily and Jack as unequivocally his while exposing Lisa's pregnancy as a calculated ploy to secure her position through emotional leverage rather than biology. A revelation that hollowed my revenge because it circled back to Mom's deceptions that had seeded this chaos from her affair's shadows, making me question if claiming the trust would heal the fractures or merely repaint them in gold leaf that masked deeper rot. And as we shook hands on the tentative agreement with promises of lawyers, drawing papers by week's end, I departed the dealership with the folder lighter, but my heart heavier under the weight of ambiguities that lingered like fog over the cornfields, returning to the house where the safe stood ajar as an emblem of half-buried truths, pondering in the quiet evening whether the trump card had truly redeemed my losses or simply rearranged the ruins into a facade of victory that left Elias's full story untold and the cost of vengeance echoing in the empty rooms, inviting reflections on whether some secrets demand eternal silence to preserve the fragile piece of ordinary lives stitched from imperfect threads, the uncertainty settling as a profound ache that promised no tidy closure, but endless what-ifs under the watchful stars.